Block 1. The summer solstice celebration always filled me with dread, while others in our pack saw it as the pinnacle of joy. For me, it was the night I had to be most careful, most vigilant in my deception. Tonight would mark 8 years since I began limping. 8 years of safety bought with a simple falsehood. The scent of pine smoke and roasting meat drifted through my open window, carried on the warm evening breeze that rustled the cream-colored curtains. Outside, laughter and music had already begun, the sounds of celebration rising from the clearing where our pack gathered. My fingers trembled slightly as I braided my pale blonde hair, twisting it into a simple crown that would keep it from my face. Simple, unassuming. That was how I needed to appear. "Eleanor," my mother's voice called from downstairs. "They're waiting. You know what happens if you're late." I did know. The Alpha's council didn't tolerate tardiness at mandatory gatherings, especially not the solstice, when unmated females were expected to dance for potential mates. My stomach nodded at the thought. On my dresser sat my grandmother's silver pendant, a crescent moon cradling a small amber stone. She had pressed it into my palm the day before she died, her fingers cold, but her eyes fierce with purpose. "Your strength isn't in your claws or your teeth, Eleanor," she had whispered. "It's in here." She had tapped my temple, and here. Her weathered finger had rested over my heart. "Remember that when the time comes." I clutched the pendant now, drawing strength from it as I had countless times before. Then I carefully tucked it beneath my dress, a simple blue garment that hung loosely on my frame, deliberately chosen to hide any curves that might attract attention. With practiced precision, I shifted my weight to my right leg and began the uneven gait that had become second nature. Left foot down normally, right foot dragging slightly, a barely perceptible wince crossing my features with each step. The lie lived in my muscles now, so deeply ingrained I sometimes caught myself limping even when alone. Downstairs, my mother waited by the door, her expression a mixture of concern and resignation. At 38, she still possessed the beauty that had once made her the pack's most sought-after female. Now, widowed for 10 years, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that I admired more than she knew. "You can't hide forever," she said softly, adjusting my dress collar. "Sooner or later, someone will see through it." I swallowed hard. "I just need more time." Her eyes, the same pale blue as mine, searched my face. "Time for what, Eleanor? To watch everyone else build their lives while yours stand still?" I had no answer for her. How could I explain that the thought of being claimed, of belonging to someone simply because biology dictated it, filled me with a terror so profound it stole my breath? How the rumors of the Alpha King's cruelty toward his mate had only strengthened my resolve never to risk such a fate. Outside, the drums began, their rhythmic pounding matching my quickening heartbeat. Mother sighed and opened the door. Together, we stepped into the gathering twilight, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue above. The clearing was transformed, lanterns hung from tree branches, casting golden light over wooden tables laden with food. Pack members moved about, greeting one another, the hierarchy evident in every interaction. Young, unmated males stood in clusters, eyes darting toward the females who would soon dance. The council members sat on elevated chairs, backs straight, faces impassive as they surveyed the gathering. And there, in the center of it all, was a throne I had never seen before, ornately carved from a single massive trunk, inlaid with silver that caught the firelight. It stood empty, ominous in its waiting. "He's here," someone whispered nearby, the words sending a ripple of tension through the crowd. "The Alpha King has returned." My blood turned to ice. Alexander Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, had been away for years, expanding his domain through both conquest and alliance. His pack, our pack, had been left under the care of his beta, Vincent, a stern but fair leader. But the rumors of Alexander's brutality, his cold calculation, had grown with each passing season, and now he had returned on the night of the solstice dance. "Eleanor, stay close," my mother murmured, her fingers closing around my wrist as the crowd parted. He entered the clearing like a storm front, tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that commanded every eye. His hair was dark as midnight, contrasting sharply with eyes the color of amber in sunlight. He moved with the fluid grace of an apex predator, each step deliberate. powerful. The scars visible on his forearms and the side of his neck told stories of battles won, challenges met. I lowered my gaze immediately, heart hammering against my ribs. Around us, pack members bowed their heads in deference. My mother tugged gently at my arm, and I dipped into an awkward curtsy. Careful to maintain my uneven stance, Alexander took his seat on the throne, one hand resting casually on the carved armrest, the other holding a goblet of deep red wine. His gaze swept over the gathering, lingering here and there as if assessing each member's worth in a single glance. "Let the solstice begin," he commanded, his voice deep and resonant, carrying effortlessly across the clearing. The traditional feast came first, a blessing from the pack elders, followed by a meal that, despite my anxiety, smelled delicious. I sat beside my mother at one of the lower tables, keeping to myself, responding with polite smiles and minimal words when addressed. I ate little, my appetite diminished by the weight of Alexander's presence. As the meal concluded, the drums intensified. Young females rose from their seats, moving toward the center of the clearing where a circle had formed. My mother squeezed my hand beneath the table. "When they call for all unmated females, just stay seated," she whispered. "I'll say you're having a bad night with your leg." I nodded gratefully, relief washing through me. It was the same excuse we used every year, and it had worked thus far. The pack's healer had examined me when I first began limping, finding nothing physically wrong but accepting my claims of mysterious pain. Over time, people simply accepted my condition as unchangeable. The initial dances began, traditional pack movements that told the story of our history, our connection to the moon, the sacred bond between mates. I watched, mesmerized despite myself by the grace of the dancers, the way the firelight played across their faces. Then came the moment I dreaded. Vincent rose from his seat beside Alexander and raised his hands for silence. "As is our tradition, we call upon all unmated females to present themselves in the dance of offering," he announced, his eyes scanning the tables. One by one, young women rose and stepped forward, their movements shy or bold according to their natures. I kept my head down, focusing on the wooden grain of the table, feeling my mother's hand protectively covering mine. The silence that fell was so sudden, so complete, that I could hear the crackling of the bonfire. Slowly, I raised my head. Alexander Blackthorne had risen from his throne and was staring directly at me. His amber eyes narrowed, his head tilted slightly as if confronted with a puzzle. "You?" he said, pointing one finger in my direction. "The blonde one with the limp. Why do you not join the dance?" All eyes turned to me. My throat closed. Panic flooding my system, my mother answered for me. "My daughter's leg, Alpha. It pains her greatly. She cannot dance." Alexander's gaze didn't waver from mine. "Strange," he said softly, though his voice carried in the silence. "I've heard of this mysterious ailment that has plagued her for—" "How long has it been now?" 8 years, Alpha," Vincent supplied. 8 years, Alexander repeated, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "And in all that time, no healer has found a cause? No remedy has helped?" I shook my head, unable to speak. "Come here," he commanded. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not after all this time. My mother's fingers dug into my arm, but there was nothing she could do. A direct command from the Alpha King could not be refused. I stood, carefully maintaining my limp as I made my way forward. Each step felt like walking toward my execution. The crowd parted, creating a path to where Alexander stood waiting, his posture relaxed but his eyes intent. When I reached him, I kept my gaze lowered, studying the worn toes of my simple shoes. "Look at me," he said quietly. I raised my eyes to his, expecting anger or suspicion. Instead, I found curiosity, and something else I couldn't name, something that made my skin prickle with awareness. "What is your name?" he asked. "Eleanor, Alpha King." "Eleanor," he repeated, as if tasting the name. "You've been limping for 8 years?" "Yes, Alpha King." He circled me slowly, his gaze assessing. I remained still, fighting the urge to run. "The solstice dance is sacred," he said, stopping in front of me again. "It honors our ancestors, our traditions." He paused, his head tilting slightly. You truly cannot participate? I swallowed hard. The pain, Alpha. It becomes unbearable when I dance with me, Eleanor. The request, no, the command, hung in the air between us. The pack watched in stunned silence. No Alpha had ever danced with a crippled wolf. I can't, I whispered, panic rising in my throat. His smile was slow, predatory. I think you can. Before I could respond, he had taken my hand in his touch unexpectedly gentle. His other hand came to rest at my waist, and a jolt of something electric shot through me at the contact. The drums, he called over his shoulder, never taking his eyes from mine. The drummers hesitated only a moment before beginning a slow, rhythmic beat. Alexander began to move, guiding me with subtle pressure at my waist. I stumbled deliberately, clinging to my deception even as my heart threatened to beat out of my chest. Stop it, he murmured, his voice too low for others to hear. We both know there's nothing wrong with your leg. My blood froze. I don't know what you... 8 years is a long time to maintain a lie, little wolf, a very detailed, consistent lie. His fingers tightened slightly at my waist. But your muscles tell a different story. There's no atrophy, no genuine weakness. And sometimes, when you think no one is watching, you forget to favor that leg. Horror washed through me in a cold wave. He knew. Somehow he had seen through me in mere minutes when others had believed me for years. Why? He asked simply. I couldn't answer. The truth would condemn me. Lying would be futile. Dance with me properly, he said, or I will announce your deception to the entire pack. Trapped. I was completely trapped. Slowly, testing, I put weight on my bad leg. Then, with a shuddering breath, I straightened my posture and took a proper step. Alexander's eyes flashed with triumph. There she is, he murmured. The drums picked up tempo, and he led me into the traditional movements of the solstice dance. My body remembered, despite the years of pretense. Each step, each turn came flooding back as if I had never stopped dancing. Around us, whispers rippled through the crowd. I caught glimpses of shocked faces, of my mother's pale features, of Vincent's calculating stare. Why the deception? Alexander asked again, as he guided me through a turn, this time, with his amber eyes holding mine, with his hand warm at my waist. I found myself answering truthfully, to avoid being claimed, I whispered. To choose my own fate. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, followed by what might have been respect. Brave, he said softly. Foolish, but brave. The dance ended, and he released me with unexpected reluctance. I stood before him, my deception exposed, waiting for judgment. The pack watched in stunned silence. Alexander's gaze traveled over my face, studying me with an intensity that made it difficult to breathe. Then he turned to address the gathering. The solstice celebrates transformation, he announced, his voice carrying across the clearing. The longest day, the shortest night, a turning point. He glanced back at me. It seems we have witnessed a miracle of transformation tonight. Murmurs of agreement, of wonder, rose from the crowd. Return to your seat, Eleanor, he said quietly. We'll speak more of this later. As I made my way back to my mother on steady legs for the first time in 8 years, I felt the weight of Alexander's gaze following me, and knew with bone-deep certainty that my life had irrevocably changed. My mother's face was ashen when I reached her, her fingers trembling as they closed around mine. What have you done? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the renewed sounds of celebration. The drums had started again, other dancers taking the floor, but I could feel the sideways glances, hear the whispers behind hands. I had no choice, I murmured, unable to meet her eyes. The weight of my exposed lie pressed against my chest, making it difficult to breathe. He knew, Mother. Somehow, he knew. The celebrations continued around us, but I was numb to them, my mind racing through possible consequences. Would I be punished? Banished? Our pack had strict rules about deception, particularly deception that mocked sacred traditions like the solstice dance. My grandmother's pendant felt suddenly heavy against my skin, as if reminding me of her words. Your strength isn't in your claws or your teeth. I touched the small bulge beneath my dress, drawing what comfort I could from the connection to her memory. The night progressed in a blur of tension. Pack members approached our table, some with genuine smiles of wonder at my miraculous recovery, others with thinly veiled suspicion in their eyes. I answered their questions vaguely, claiming the Alpha King's presence had somehow healed me, letting them draw their own conclusions. It was easier than explaining a deception I barely understood myself. As the moon reached its zenith, casting silver light over the clearing, I felt rather than saw Alexander rise from his throne. The crowd parted for him as he moved with purposeful strides directly toward our table. My heart leapt into my throat. "Eleanor," he said, my name a command on his lips. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. My mother's fingers tightened around mine for a brief moment before reluctantly releasing me. I stood, keenly aware of how strange it felt to rise without pretending, to stand evenly on both feet before the gathered pack. Alexander offered his arm, a courtesy I hadn't expected. I hesitated before placing my hand lightly upon it, feeling the solid muscle beneath his sleeve. He led me away from the clearing, into the edge of the forest, where the sounds of celebration dimmed and the silver moonlight filtered through the canopy of leaves above. We walked in silence for several minutes, following a narrow path that wound between ancient trees. The night air was cooler here, carrying the scent of wild roses and damp earth. Finally, he stopped in a small clearing, turning to face me with unreadable eyes. 8 years, he said simply. "Explain." I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. If this was to be my judgment, I would face it with dignity. "When I turned 18, I watched what happened to my friend Sophia," I began, the memories flooding back with painful clarity. "She was claimed by Gregory within hours of her birthday celebration. She had no choice, no say. He was cruel to her. Everyone knew it, but no one stopped it." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. 3 months later, she disappeared. They say she ran away, but I know. I stopped, suddenly aware I was criticizing pack justice to the Alpha King himself. "Continue," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I decided I wouldn't let that happen to me," I whispered. "I couldn't fight the laws of our kind, couldn't challenge traditions that have existed for centuries. But I could make myself undesirable, damaged goods." The words tasted bitter on my tongue. No wolf wants a mate who can't run alongside them, who can't dance at gatherings, who might bear cubs with the same affliction. Alexander was silent for a long moment, his amber eyes reflecting the moonlight as they studied my face. "And it worked," he finally said, something like reluctant admiration in his tone. "Until tonight," I added softly. He moved closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Eleanor?" I shook my head, unable to speak with him so near. "I see intelligence, determination, survival instinct." His voice dropped lower. "Do you know how rare those qualities are? How valuable?" Confusion replaced my fear. This wasn't the anger I had expected, the punishment I had braced for. "You lied to your pack for 8 years, he continued, circling me slowly. "You maintained a physical deception that required constant vigilance, constant control. You outsmarted healers, council members, everyone." He stopped in front of me again. "Everyone except me." A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "Are you going to punish me?" His laugh was unexpected, a deep, rich sound that seemed to echo among the trees. "Punish you? For what? For having the courage to forge your own path? For refusing to be a victim?" He shook his head. "No, little wolf, I'm not going to punish you." Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by suspicion. "Then why bring me out here? Why expose me in front of everyone?" Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Because lies have consequences, even clever ones. And because I needed to understand. Understand what? Why, the moment I entered that clearing, my wolf recognized you." The words hung in the air between us, charged with meaning I wasn't ready to face. My heart began to race, my instincts screaming at me to run. But there was nowhere to go. No escape from the intensity of his gaze. "That's not possible," I whispered. "You've never even seen me before tonight." "Haven't I?" He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face with surprising gentleness. 5 years ago, during the border wars with the Eastern Packs. A small cottage at the edge of our territory. A young woman with pale blonde hair, reading by candlelight. My breath caught. The memory surfaced. A stormy night, our cottage windows rattling with thunder. I had been alone, Mother gone to help with a difficult birth in the village. A shadow at the window had startled me, the glimpse of amber eyes in the darkness. That was you, I breathed. He nodded. I was wounded, tracking rogues who had breached our borders. I saw you through the window, and something shifted. His jaw tightened. But when I returned the next day, I was told about the crippled daughter of Sarah Miller, the girl who couldn't dance, couldn't run, who kept to herself and rarely left her home. So you left, I said, understanding dawning. You continued your campaigns, your conquests. I left, he agreed, but I never forgot. And when I returned and saw you tonight, limping across that clearing, his eyes darkened. My wolf knew instantly what my human mind took longer to piece together. The scent was right, but the movement was wrong. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. What happens now? Instead of answering, he asked, why did you never leave? You could have gone to another territory, started fresh where no one knew of your supposed disability. The question caught me off guard. My mother, I said simply. After my father died, she had no one else, and she's given up so much for me already. Something softened in his expression. Loyalty. Another rare quality. He stepped closer, and I forced myself not to retreat. He was close enough now that I could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes, could smell the scent of him, pine and smoke and something wild. Dance with me, he said suddenly. Here, where there are no eyes watching, no judgments. Dance with me as you were meant to. Before I could respond, he had taken my hand in his other hand settling at my waist. There was no music save for the night sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the distant hooting of an owl, the soft whisper of our breathing. I should have pulled away, should have maintained whatever distance I could. Instead, I found myself moving with him, our steps falling into natural rhythm. He led with confidence but without dominance, his touch firm, but never controlling. Why did you really maintain the deception for so long? He asked as we turned beneath the dappled moonlight. The truth, Eleanor. Perhaps it was the intimacy of the moment, or the strange sense that I stood at a crossroads, but I found myself answering honestly. Freedom, I whispered. I watched the claimed females in our pack, how they became extensions of their mates, how their dreams and desires became secondary. Even the happy ones surrendered something of themselves. His hand tightened slightly at my waist. Is that what you believe mating to be? Surrender? Isn't it? The female follows the male, bears his children, supports his ambitions. In weak pairings, perhaps, he conceded. In pairings formed for convenience or status or simple biology. The moonlight caught in his dark hair as he leaned closer. But a true mating, a recognition between equals, that's different. We had stopped dancing, I realized. We stood in the center of the small clearing, his hand still at my waist, mine resting on his shoulder, too close, far too close. You don't believe me, he said, reading my expression. I've never seen it, I admitted. Not in our pack. A shadow crossed his features. No, you wouldn't have. Not under Vincent's leadership while I was away. His hand released my waist, moving to gently clasp my chin, tilting my face up to his. My pulse fluttered wildly at the contact. Eleanor Miller, do you know what I've been doing these past 5 years? I shook my head slightly, constrained by his gentle grip. Building alliances, strengthening our borders, creating a future where our pack thrives, not just survives. His thumb traced the line of my jaw, sending shivers down my spine. And finding a way to change traditions that no longer serve us. What traditions? I managed to ask, my voice barely audible. Forced mating, females claimed against their will. The strong preying on the weak. His eyes held mine, fierce with conviction. That ends with my return. That's why I came back. Hope, dangerous, fragile hope, flickered to life within me. You can change centuries of pack law. I already have. In the Northern Territories I control, females have the right of refusal, the right to choose. His lips curved into a smile. Did you truly think you were the only one rebelling against the old ways? The implications staggered me. All these years hiding, deceiving, living half a life, when the very change I longed for was already in motion. Why didn't we hear of this? I asked. Why didn't Vincent belongs to the old guard, Alexander interrupted, his expression hardening. He and his supporters have resisted the changes, kept news of them from spreading here. That's why I returned personally, rather than sending an envoy. He released my chin, taking a step back, and I felt suddenly cold without his nearness. There will be resistance, he continued. Change never comes easily, especially to those who benefit from the current order. Understanding dawned. That's why you exposed me tonight. To make a statement. He inclined his head slightly. A woman who defied tradition for 8 years, rather than surrender her freedom. You became my living example without intending to. I should have been angry at being used as a pawn in his political maneuvering. Instead, I felt a strange sense of purpose unfurling within me. What happens now? I asked again. Now, he said, you have a choice. You can continue living as you have been. Though without the limp, I would hope. His lips quirked in a half-smile. Or you can stand with me publicly, help me show our pack what strength truly looks like. Stand with you as what? I asked, caution tempering the hope in my chest. His gaze intensified, holding mine with an emotion I couldn't name. As whatever you choose to be, Eleanor. That's the point. A twig snapped in the forest behind us, and Alexander turned sharply, positioning himself between me and the potential threat. A moment later, Vincent stepped into the clearing, his face tight with barely controlled anger. Alpha, he said, offering a bow that held the minimum required respect. The pack is waiting for your return to conclude the solstice ceremony. Alexander's posture remained relaxed, but I sensed the tension coiling within him. We'll return shortly. Vincent's gaze shifted to me, cold assessment in his eyes. The council has questions about tonight's revelation. The council answers to me, Alexander reminded him quietly, not the other way around. A muscle twitched in Vincent's jaw. Of course, Alpha. But there are protocols, traditions. Traditions change. Alexander cut him off. As you're well aware. The two men stared at each other, a silent battle of wills that made the air between them seem to crackle with tension. Finally, Vincent inclined his head in a gesture that conceded the moment, but not the war. We await your return, he said, then turned and disappeared back into the darkness of the forest. Alexander remained still until the sounds of Vincent's departure had faded entirely. Then he turned back to me, his expression grave. You see the challenge ahead, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. He won't be the only one resistant to change. No, Alexander agreed. He won't. He held out his hand to me, palm up. An invitation, not a command. Are you ready to return? I looked at his outstretched hand, understanding all it represented. For 8 years I had hidden in the shadows, protected by my deception. Stepping into the light beside Alexander meant facing the judgment of the pack, the anger of those like Vincent, the uncertainty of a future in flux. But it also meant freedom, not just for me, but potentially for every female in our pack. I placed my hand in his, my grandmother's words echoing in my mind. Your strength isn't in your claws or your teeth, Eleanor. It's in here and here. I'm ready, I said, and was surprised to find it was true. As we walked back toward the celebration, Alexander's hand warm around mine, I felt the weight of my pendant against my skin. No longer a burden, but a reminder of who I was and what I could become. The path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in 8 years, I was walking it without pretense. We returned to a clearing, humming with tension. Conversations halted as Alexander and I emerged from the forest path, his hand still holding mine. The silence spread like ripples in a pond, faces turning toward us with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. The council members had gathered near the throne, Vincent at their center, their postures rigid with disapproval. My mother stood apart from them, her face pale but her chin lifted in defiance. The sight of her standing alone against their unified front made my chest ache. "Mother," I called, pulling gently away from Alexander to go to her. She embraced me tightly, her body trembling slightly. "Are you all right?" she whispered against my hair. "I'm fine," I assured her, drawing back to meet her worried gaze. "Better than fine." Her eyes searched mine, then flicked to Alexander, who had followed me at a respectful distance. "What did he say to you?" she asked, her voice low with concern. Before I could answer, Elder Miriam, the oldest member of the council, stepped forward. Despite her advanced age, she carried herself with formidable dignity, her silver hair gleaming in the firelight. "Alpha King," she addressed Alexander, her voice carrying across the now silent clearing. "The council requests clarification regarding tonight's events." Alexander's expression remained impassive, but I sensed a subtle shift in his stance. A warrior preparing for battle. "Speak, Elder," he said. "The girl has deceived the pack for 8 years, Miriam stated, her rheumy eyes finding mine with surprising sharpness. Such deception cannot go unaddressed. Murmurs of agreement rose from the gathered pack members. I felt myself shrinking inward, the weight of their collective judgment pressing against me. My mother's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. "You believe punishment is warranted?" Alexander asked, his tone deceptively mild. "Our laws are clear," Vincent interjected. "Deception that mocks sacred traditions is punishable by—" "I know our laws," Alexander cut him off, his voice dropping to a dangerous register that silenced Vincent immediately. "I wrote many of them." He moved forward, climbing the slight elevation where the council stood, until he towered over them. Though he addressed the elders, his voice projected to the entire gathering. For 8 years, a young woman in this pack was so terrified of being claimed against her will that she chose to live half a life rather than risk becoming property. His gaze swept over the crowd. "What does that tell you about the state of our pack?" Uneasy silence greeted his question. "It tells me," he continued, "that we have failed. Failed to protect our own. Failed to honor the true meaning of the mating bond." Elder Miriam's eyes narrowed. "You speak of changes to our ways. Changes many of us have not agreed to. Changes that have already been implemented across the northern territories," Alexander countered. "Territories that are now thriving while this one, my home, has stagnated in outdated traditions." I watched the faces in the crowd, gauging reactions. Some nodded in tentative agreement, others frowned in confusion or anger. Division was already forming, fault lines cracking through the pack's unity. "The solstice dance," Alexander continued, "was never meant to be a market where females are displayed for males to claim. It was a celebration of choice, of finding your equal, your true match through shared movement and rhythm." His voice softened with conviction. Somewhere along the way, that meaning was corrupted. "By whom?" Vincent challenged. "Our ancestors? The generations who built this pack?" "By those who saw power in control rather than in unity," Alexander replied evenly. "By those who confused dominance with leadership." He turned, descending to the clearing floor, and extended his hand toward me. "Eleanor." My heart stuttered in my chest. He was calling me to stand beside him, to become the center of this growing conflict. My mother's fingers tightened around mine. "You don't have to," she whispered. But I did. I knew I did. Not just for myself, but for every female who had ever felt trapped by our traditions, for every wolf who had surrendered their will to avoid something worse. I squeezed my mother's hand once more, then released it. Walking forward on steady legs, I joined Alexander before the council, before the pack. I kept my head high, though my pulse raced with a combination of terror and exhilaration. "Eleanor Miller deceived no one," Alexander announced. "She protected herself in the only way available to her. If there is blame to be assigned, it belongs to those who made such protection necessary." Vincent stepped forward, his expression thunderous. "You would upend generations of tradition for one female's defiance?" "I would upend traditions that harm rather than help," Alexander corrected. "And I would do it not for one female, but for all of our pack." A young woman, Sophia's younger sister, I realized with a jolt, pushed through the crowd. "What about those already claimed?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "What about my sister?" A heavy silence fell. Everyone knew Sophia's story, though few spoke of it openly. Alexander's expression softened as he addressed her. Justice comes in many forms, Rebecca. Some swift, some slow. His gaze shifted momentarily to Vincent, something dangerous flashing in his eyes. But it comes. The implication hung in the air, electric with promise. I stared at Vincent, at the sudden tension in his shoulders, the flicker of something like fear in his eyes. Understanding bloomed within me, a terrible, clarifying realization. It was you, I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. You knew what Gregory was doing to Sophia. All eyes turned to me, then to Vincent. Alexander remained silent, allowing the moment to unfold. You have no proof of anything, Vincent said coldly. But there was guilt in his averted gaze, in the defensive set of his shoulders. I stepped toward him, finding courage I didn't know I possessed. Sophia told me she went to you for help, I continued, memories surfacing of tearful confessions whispered in the safety of my bedroom. She showed you the bruises, and you turned her away. Rebecca made a small, broken sound. Other pack members began to whisper, the noise growing like a gathering storm. Silence, Vincent commanded. But his authority had already begun to crumble. There will be a full investigation, Alexander stated, his voice cutting through the growing chaos, into Sophia's disappearance and all claims made during my absence. He turned to address the pack directly. Change comes, not by my decree alone, but by necessity. Our pack will evolve or it will perish. His hand found the small of my back, a steadying presence as the clearing erupted in voices. Questions, protests, expressions of support and opposition tangling together in a cacophony of uncertainty. This is just the beginning, he murmured. His words meant only for me. I nodded, understanding all too well the storm we had unleashed. My gaze found my mother in the crowd, her face a mixture of pride and worry. Then I looked to Rebecca, tears streaming down her face, but something like hope kindling in her eyes. For them, for all of us, I would face whatever came next. The rest of the night passed in a blur of tense conversations and heated debates. The pack fractured into groups, some rallying around the council members who opposed change, others gathering near Alexander to hear more of the reforms he had implemented elsewhere. My mother and I sat together at the edge of the clearing, watching the dynamics shift like sand beneath a rising tide. You never told me about Sophia, my mother said quietly, her eyes on the flames of the now diminishing bonfire. I promised her I wouldn't, I replied. She was afraid of what Gregory might do if she spoke out publicly. Mother nodded slowly, and now she's gone. Yes. The word tasted bitter, but perhaps not forgotten. As the night deepened, Alexander approached our table, his expression grave. The council has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow, he said without preamble. All pack members are required to attend. A trial? My mother asked, concern etching lines around her eyes. A reckoning? Alexander corrected. He looked at me. Will you speak? Tell what you know about Sophia? The prospect terrified me. Standing against Vincent and his supporters would make me a target, would shatter the careful invisibility I had cultivated for years. But Sophia's face floated in my memory, her bright smile that had dimmed over time, the bruises she had tried to hide, her final desperate plea for help the night before she disappeared. Yes, I said, I'll speak. Alexander nodded, satisfaction evident in the set of his shoulders. Rest tonight. Tomorrow will not be easy. 1. He turned to leave, then paused, glancing back at me. Eleanor. Thank you. The simple words carried unexpected weight, settling something restless within me. I watched him walk away, rejoining the dwindling celebration, moving among the pack members with natural authority, tempered by genuine attention to each person he spoke with. He's not what I expected, my mother observed, following my gaze. No, I agreed softly. He's not. We returned home well after midnight, the cottage quiet and familiar around us. Despite the exhaustion that dragged at my limbs, sleep eluded me. I sat by my bedroom window, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, my grandmother's pendant clutched in my palm. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, when a sharp knock at our door startled me from my reverie. My mother appeared in the hallway, hastily tying a robe around her nightgown, her expression alarmed. "Stay here," she instructed, but I was already following her to the door. She opened it to find Rebecca standing on our porch, her face tear-stained, her clothes disheveled as if she had dressed in haste. "They're gone," she blurted. "Vincent, Gregory, 3 others from the council. They fled during the night." My mother pulled her inside, closing the door quickly. "Are you certain?" Rebecca nodded frantically. "Alexander sent search parties after them, but—" She turned to me, gripping my arms with desperate intensity. "Eleanor, they took the archive box, the one with all the pack records." Understanding hit me like a physical blow. The archives contained everything: birth records, mating certificates, council decisions, territory maps. In the wrong hands, that information could be devastating. "We need to tell Alexander," I said, already moving toward the door. "He knows," Rebecca replied. "He's calling all pack members to the clearing now." That's why I came. My mother disappeared into her bedroom, returning moments later dressed for the day. I realized I was still wearing my nightgown and hurried to change, pulling on simple trousers and a tunic, pushing my feet into worn boots. My fingers fumbled with the clasp of my grandmother's pendant before finally securing it around my neck. Together, the 3 of us hurried through the awakening village toward the central clearing. The mood was tense, frightened faces emerging from homes, questions flying between neighbors as we all converged on the meeting place. Alexander stood at the center, his expression grim but controlled. Beside him was a woman I didn't recognize. Tall and lean, with short cropped dark hair and vigilant eyes that scanned the gathering continuously. "My second in command from the Northern Territory," Rebecca whispered in explanation. "Lydia. They say she's the finest tracker in 3 territories." When most of the pack had assembled, Alexander raised his hand for silence. The murmurs died immediately. "By now, you've heard that Vincent and several others have fled," he began without preamble. "What you may not know is that before leaving, they broke into the council chambers and stole pack records dating back generations." Gasps and exclamations of shock rippled through the crowd. "Search parties are already tracking them," Alexander continued. "But I believe their destination is the Eastern Territories, where they hope to find sanctuary with Alpha Donovan." I shivered at the name. Donovan's reputation for brutality exceeded even the rumors that had surrounded Alexander. The thought of Vincent allying with such a wolf was chilling. "What do they hope to gain?" someone called from the crowd. Alexander's expression darkened. "Control. Power. The records contain information they believe will allow them to challenge my leadership and maintain the old ways." His gaze swept across the gathered faces. "I won't lie to you. We face a threat unlike any in recent memory. If Donovan grants them sanctuary and supports their cause, we could be looking at conflict between territories." Fear tightened around my chest like a vice. Conflict meant war. War meant death. "What can we do?" My voice surprised me, rising clear and steady despite my fear. Alexander's eyes found mine, something like approval warming their amber depths. "Prepare, stand together, and most importantly, continue the work of reform even in the face of opposition." He gestured to Lydia, who stepped forward. "We need volunteers for additional search parties. Those with tracking skills, those who know the eastern borders." Several pack members moved forward immediately. Others hesitated, uncertainty evident in their postures. "This isn't just about records," Alexander said, addressing the hesitation directly. "This is about what kind of pack we choose to be, what future we build together." His words struck something deep within me. Without fully intending to, I found myself stepping forward. "I'll help." My mother made a small sound of distress behind me, but didn't try to stop me. Alexander's gaze met mine, questioning. "You're not a tracker, Eleanor." "No," I agreed, "but I know these woods better than most. I spent 8 years exploring them while everyone thought I was resting my leg at home." A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the crowd, breaking some of the tension. "And," I added more quietly, "I owe it to Sophia." Alexander studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Report to Lydia for assignment." As the meeting dispersed into purposeful activity, volunteers forming search groups, others organizing supplies, Still others reinforcing the perimeter guards. I made my way to where Lydia stood consulting a rough map spread across a wooden table. "Eleanor, right?" she asked without looking up. "The one who faked a limp for 8 years?" "Yes," I answered, heat rising to my cheeks. Now she did look up, a glint of respect in her dark eyes. "Clever. Commitment to the long game." She tapped a section of the map. "You said you know these woods. How well?" "Every stream, every cave, every hidden path," I replied with quiet confidence. It wasn't an exaggeration. While others ran in their wolf forms, I had walked these forests in human form, memorizing details that runners might miss. "Good. You'll work with me." She rolled up the map with efficient movements. "We leave in an hour. Pack light, dress warm." As she strode away, barking orders to others in her group, I felt a presence at my back. Turning, I found Alexander standing close, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "No one would think less of you for staying." I met his gaze steadily. "I would think less of me." His lips curved in a small smile. "I thought you might say that." He reached out, his fingers barely brushing my arm, a touch so light it might have been imagined. "Be careful, Eleanor. Vincent is dangerous when cornered." The concern in his voice sent a flutter through my chest. "I will." He nodded once, then moved away to consult with another group. I watched him go, struck by the easy authority he carried, how different it was from Vincent's brittle command. My mother appeared at my side, pressing a small pack into my hands. "Food, water, an extra sweater," she explained, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Eleanor, are you sure about this?" I covered her hands with mine. "I've been hiding for 8 years, Mother. It's time I stood up." "I know," she whispered. "I'm proud of you. She broke off, swallowing hard. "Come back to me." "I will," I promised, embracing her tightly. "We're going to make things better, for all of us." As I prepared to leave with Lydia's tracking group, I felt a strange sense of rightness settling over me. For years, I had used deception to avoid a fate I feared. Now I was choosing a path forward, one that might lead to danger, but also to something I had never truly allowed myself to hope for. Freedom not just for myself, but for everyone. The weight of my grandmother's pendant rested against my skin, no longer a burden, but a reminder. Your strength isn't in your claws or your teeth, Eleanor. It's in here, and here. Head high, I joined the trackers at the edge of the clearing, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The forest embraced us in its green shadows as we set out, a group of 6 with Lydia at the lead. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and recent rain. We moved quietly, following a trail visible only to those trained to see the subtle signs of passage. A broken twig here, a disturbed patch of moss there. I stayed close to Lydia, pointing out landmarks and hidden paths as we traveled east. The others in our group, 2 males and 3 females, all experienced trackers, watched me with curious eyes. I could read the questions in their glances. How had I maintained my deception for so long? What else was I hiding? But they kept their thoughts to themselves, focused on the task at hand. "Vincent knows these woods nearly as well as you claim to," Lydia remarked as we paused beside a small stream to refill our water containers. "What makes you think we can overtake him?" "He knows the main paths," I corrected, kneeling to splash cool water on my face. "The hunting routes, the ceremonial ways. But the secret places," I smiled faintly, "those belong to the invisible ones." "The invisible ones?" "Those the pack overlooks, the elderly who can no longer run with the hunters, the children too young to join the hunts." I met her gaze. The crippled girl no one expected to wander far from home. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Show me." I led them off the trail we had been following, into a dense thicket that seemed impenetrable at first glance. Pushing aside branches with practiced hands, I revealed a narrow tunnel through the foliage, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. "This cuts directly east for nearly 2 miles, I explained. "It follows an old stream bed that dried up decades ago. Few know it exists." Lydia's expression shifted from skepticism to approval. "Lead on." We made better time than I had dared hope, emerging from the hidden path into a small meadow dappled with early morning sunlight. Lydia crouched, examining the ground with expert eyes. They came through here, she confirmed, fingers hovering over a partial footprint in a patch of soft earth. Recently, within the last 6 hours, hope surged through me. Then we're gaining on them. We continued this way throughout the morning, following the main trail where necessary, cutting through my secret paths where possible. By midday, even the most skeptical members of our group had begun to look at me with new respect. We stopped briefly to eat, sheltered beneath the spreading branches of an ancient oak. The forest was quieter here, the birdsong more subdued, as if the trees themselves held their breath in anticipation. We're nearing the eastern border, Lydia observed, studying her map. Once they cross into Donovan's territory, our task becomes much more complicated. If they make it that far, one of the male trackers, Marcus, I had learned, added grimly. I picked at my food, appetite diminished by the growing tension. The weight of our mission pressed against my chest. This wasn't just about recovering stolen records anymore. It was about preventing a conflict that could tear apart multiple territories, cost countless lives. Why did you really volunteer for this, Eleanor? Lydia asked suddenly, her sharp eyes assessing me. And don't say it was for Sophia, there's more. The others paused in their eating, attention turning to me. I set aside my half-finished meal, considering my answer carefully. For 8 years I lived in fear, I said finally. Fear of being claimed, fear of losing my freedom, fear of being trapped in a life I didn't choose. I met Lydia's gaze steadily. I'm tired of fear dictating my choices. She nodded slowly. Fear is useful. It keeps you alert, keeps you alive. But when it becomes your master rather than your servant. She left the thought unfinished. Alexander spoke of changes in the Northern Territories, I said, curiosity overcoming my usual reserve. What's it really like there? A small smile touched Lydia's lips. Different. Challenging at first. Change always is. But better. She looked around at our group. Females serve on the council equally with males. Matings are by choice, not claim. Strengths are valued wherever they appear, not just in those with the sharpest claws. And you? I asked. What's your place in this new order? I'm second, because I earned it, she said simply. Not because I was born male or female, strong or fast, but because I proved my worth through actions. Her words settled over me like a revelation, brightening the future I had barely allowed myself to imagine, a world where worth was measured by character rather than circumstance of birth. It seemed almost too much to hope for. Our brief respite ended as Marcus raised his head suddenly, nostrils flaring. Blood, he said tersely. Fresh. We were on our feet instantly, packs abandoned as we followed him through the trees. The scent grew stronger as we approached a small clearing, metallic and sharp in the afternoon air. The body lay crumpled at the base of a massive pine, face down in the carpet of needles. Even before Lydia carefully turned him over, I knew who it was. Gregory, Vincent's most loyal supporter, the wolf who had claimed and abused Sophia until she disappeared. His throat had been torn out, the killing wound precise and deliberate. Not the work of an animal or a wolf in rage, but a calculated execution. Vincent, Lydia said, examining the wound with clinical detachment. This was done by someone he trusted enough to get close. Why would Vincent kill his own ally? One of the female trackers asked, her voice hushed with shock. Lydia rose, wiping her hands on the forest floor to clean them of blood. Internal conflict. Perhaps Gregory wanted to turn back, or wanted a larger share of whatever they hoped to gain. Or perhaps, I thought, but did not say, Gregory knew too much about Sophia's fate. We buried him quickly, not out of respect for the dead wolf, but to eliminate the scent of blood that might attract unwanted attention. As the others covered the grave with branches and leaves, I stood apart, conflicted emotions churning within me. I had hated Gregory for what he'd done to Sophia, had sometimes imagined him meeting a violent end. Now that it had happened, I felt no satisfaction, only a hollow sadness for all that had been lost. We need to move faster, Lydia announced as we gathered our packs. Vincent has shown he's willing to eliminate liabilities. The others with him are in danger, whether they realize it or not. We pushed on through the afternoon, the forest growing denser, the terrain more challenging as we approached the eastern border. My secret paths were less reliable here, in areas I had rarely ventured, but still we made better time than Vincent's group, encumbered as they were by the heavy archive box. As dusk approached, painting the forest in deepening shades of purple and blue, Lydia called a halt. "We're close," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Very close. I can sense them." She signaled for us to spread out, moving with exaggerated care through the underbrush. I followed her lead, placing each foot deliberately to avoid the telltale crack of a twig or rustle of leaves. Then I heard it. Voices carried on the evening breeze, tense with argument. We crept forward until we could make out a small camp nestled in a protected hollow. 3 figures moved around a small, smokeless fire: Vincent, Elder Miriam, and Council Member Thomas. The archive box sat beside Vincent, its ornate surface reflecting the firelight. "Can't be trusted," Elder Miriam was saying, her aged voice quavering with emotion. "Gregory's death proves it. This has gone too far, Vincent." "Too far?" Vincent hissed. "We've barely begun. Donovan will welcome us with open arms when he sees what we bring him." "And what exactly do we bring him?" Thomas demanded. "Ancient records? Mating certificates? Birth registries? What value do these truly hold?" Vincent's laugh was cold, sending a shiver down my spine. "Not the records themselves, you fool. The information within them. The bloodlines, the hidden connections. The proof that Alexander's claim to the throne is weaker than he knows." I exchanged a startled glance with Lydia. This was about more than opposing reform. Vincent was challenging Alexander's very right to rule. "Even if that were true," Miriam said, "war between territories will cost countless lives. Is your ambition worth such a price?" Vincent moved with frightening speed, seizing the elder by her throat. "My ambition, as you call it, is to preserve our way of life, to maintain the natural order that has kept our kind strong for generations." Lydia signaled to the others, a series of quick hand gestures that indicated we should surround the camp. As they slipped away into the gathering darkness, she leaned close to me. "Stay hidden," she whispered. "If things go wrong, run back to the pack. Tell Alexander what we've learned." Before I could protest, she was gone, melting into the shadows with practiced ease. I remained crouched behind a thick bush, heart pounding so loudly I feared Vincent would hear it. Minutes stretched like hours as I waited, straining to hear the conversation in the camp. Vincent had released Miriam, who sat rubbing her throat, eyes downcast. Thomas paced nervously, casting frequent glances into the darkening forest as if sensing the net closing around them. The attack, when it came, was swift and coordinated. Lydia and the others burst from the trees simultaneously, converging on the camp with practiced precision. Vincent reacted with astonishing speed, shoving Thomas toward the nearest attacker and grabbing for the archive box, but Lydia was faster. She intercepted him with a flying tackle that sent them both crashing into the fire, scattering embers across the forest floor. The others subdued Thomas easily, but Miriam used the distraction to seize the archive box and flee into the trees, directly toward my hiding place. I had seconds to decide. Let her pass and maintain my cover, or intercept her and risk facing the elderly but still dangerous wolf alone. My grandmother's pendant seemed to burn against my skin, reminding me of her words. My strength wasn't in my claws or teeth. It was in my mind, my heart. As Miriam approached, I stepped into her path. She skidded to a halt, the heavy box clutched to her chest, her eyes widening in recognition. "Eleanor," she gasped. "Child, let me pass. You don't understand what's at stake. Then help me understand," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the fear churning in my stomach. "Why betray the pack? Why risk war?" Her eyes darted past me, seeking escape. "Vincent believes Alexander's bloodline is tainted, that his mother's mating was never properly registered, making his claim to leadership invalid." "And you? What do you believe?" Conflict flashed across her weathered features. "I believe in our traditions, our ways, but not at the cost of blood." She shifted her grip on the box. "Vincent killed Gregory when he suggested returning. He'll kill us too, if he thinks we've lost our nerve." I held out my hands. "Then give me the box. Come back with us. Alexander will ensure your safety. She hesitated, clearly torn. Behind us, the sounds of struggle had quieted, replaced by Lydia's authoritative voice issuing commands. It's over, Elder Miriam, I said gently. Please. With a shuddering sigh, she surrendered the box to me. Its weight was surprising, the wood warm beneath my fingers. I hope you're right about him, she murmured. About Alexander. I am, I said with more confidence than I truly felt. Lydia appeared beside us, a small cut above her eye but otherwise unharmed. Vincent, I asked. Subdued, she replied grimly. Along with Thomas, no further casualties. Relief washed through me, leaving my knees weak. The box, I said, offering it to Lydia. Elder Miriam surrendered it willingly. Lydia's eyebrows rose slightly as she took the heavy container. Wise decision, she told Miriam, not unkindly. One Alexander will remember. We returned to the camp, where Vincent and Thomas knelt with their hands bound behind them. Vincent's face was a mask of hatred as he saw me standing beside Lydia, the archive box now safely in her possession. The cripple, he spat. I should have seen through your deception years ago. I met his gaze without flinching. Perhaps you were too busy maintaining your own. His eyes narrowed. You know nothing, girl. I know about Sophia, I said quietly. And I suspect Alexander will uncover the full truth once we return. Something like fear flickered across Vincent's features before he masked it with contempt. Alexander is a fool. He'll destroy everything our ancestors built with his progressive ideas. Or perhaps, Lydia countered, he'll build something better upon the foundation they left us. We made camp for the night, keeping careful watch over our prisoners. I volunteered for the first shift, sitting beside the small fire we had rekindled, the archive box at my feet. The others settled into restless sleep, exhausted by the day's events, but still alert to potential danger. As the moon rose above the trees, silvering the forest in ghostly light, I allowed myself to truly contemplate what would come next. The box would be returned. Vincent and his conspirators would face pack justice, but the deeper conflict, the struggle between tradition and change, would continue. And what of my place in this new world? For 8 years, I had defined myself by what I was avoiding, by the future I feared. Now that future had been derailed, replaced by possibilities I had never dared imagine. Movement at the edge of camp caught my attention. Lydia approached silently, settling beside me with her back against a tree trunk. You should be resting, I said. So should you. She studied me with those penetrating eyes. You did well today. The simple praise warmed me more than I had expected. I just did what needed to be done. Her gaze shifted to the moonlit forest. That's how it starts, you know. Leadership. Doing what needs to be done, even when it terrifies you. I glanced at her, startled by the implication. I'm not a leader. Aren't you? You led us through hidden paths today. You convinced an elder to surrender without bloodshed. She smiled faintly. And you stood before the entire pack last night, alongside Alexander, challenging centuries of tradition. That was different. I was just doing what needed to be done, she finished for me. We sat in comfortable silence for a time, the night sounds of the forest wrapping around us. Finally, I voiced the question that had been lingering in my mind since morning. What happens when we return, to Vincent and the others? Lydia's expression sobered. Justice. For their betrayal, for Gregory's death. She paused. For Sophia. If Vincent was involved in her disappearance, as you suspect. And to me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. She looked at me curiously. What do you think should happen to you? I considered this, fingers absently tracing the outline of my pendant beneath my tunic. For years, I've been focused on avoiding a future I feared. I never really thought about what future I wanted instead. And now? Now. I searched for words to describe the fragile hope taking root within me. Now, I want to be part of building something better, something that gives everyone the freedom to choose their own path. Lydia nodded approvingly. Alexander will need allies in this fight. Strong ones. The implication hung between us, unspoken but clear. I could continue standing in the shadows, or I could step fully into the light, with all the risks and responsibilities that entailed. "Get some rest," Lydia said, rising smoothly to her feet. "I'll take over the watch." I lay down on my makeshift bed of pine boughs, but sleep eluded me. My mind raced with possibilities, with hopes and fears equally balanced. Above me, the stars wheeled slowly across the night sky, constant yet ever-changing, like the pack itself. We returned to the packlands the following day, our captives walking sullenly before us, the archive box safely tucked in Marcus's pack. Word of our approach spread quickly, and by the time we reached the central clearing, most of the pack had gathered to witness our return. Alexander stood waiting, his face impassive, but his eyes finding mine immediately. Beside him stood my mother, her relief visible in the slump of her shoulders as she saw me safe. And there, partially hidden behind my mother, was a figure I had never expected to see again. Thin, pale, but unmistakably alive. "Sophia," I whispered, stumbling to a halt. She stepped forward, a wan smile touching her lips. "Hello, Eleanor." The clearing erupted in shocked whispers. Vincent's face drained of color as he stared at the girl everyone had believed dead or gone. Alexander raised his hand, and silence fell immediately. "As you can see," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering, "we've had developments in your absence." Lydia stepped forward, formally presenting the archive box and the captives to Alexander. He accepted the box with a nod of thanks, then turned his attention to Vincent. "You stand accused of theft, conspiracy against your alpha, and the murder of Gregory," Alexander stated. "What say you in your defense?" Vincent lifted his chin defiantly. "I acted to preserve our way of life, to protect our pack from misguided reform, by allying with Donovan, by risking war between territories." "By any means necessary," Vincent replied coldly. Alexander's expression hardened. "And what of Sophia? What role did you play in her disappearance?" Vincent's gaze flickered to the girl standing beside my mother. "I had nothing to do with that. She ran away, as everyone believed." "Liar," Sophia said, her voice stronger than her fragile appearance suggested. "You helped Gregory hide what he'd done to me. You told him to." Her voice broke. "To get rid of me when I threatened to expose you both to the pack." Vincent's face contorted with rage. "You have no proof." "We have her testimony," Alexander countered. "And we have this." He held up a folded paper, a letter, found in Gregory's cabin after a thorough search. "Detailed instructions, in your handwriting, on how to dispose of a problem." The color drained from Vincent's face. "Fortunately for Sophia," Alexander continued, "Gregory couldn't bring himself to kill her. He abandoned her in the eastern forest instead, assuming exposure would finish what he could not." "How did she survive?" someone called from the crowd. Sophia's gaze found mine. I remembered what Eleanor once told me about a cabin, deep in the woods. A place her grandmother had shown her. "I managed to find it, to shelter there until I could recover enough to travel further." I stared at her in wonder. The cabin had been my secret refuge, a place I had mentioned to her only once, years ago, that she had remembered, had found it, when at her weakest. "She returned to us 3 days ago," Alexander explained, drawn by rumors of changes in leadership, of reforms being implemented. His gaze swept over the gathered pack. Of a future where no female would suffer as she had. Vincent and his remaining conspirator were led away to be held until formal justice could be administered. Elder Miriam, in recognition of her cooperation and surrender, was placed under house arrest rather than confined with the others. As the pack dispersed, buzzing with the day's revelations, I made my way to Sophia. She embraced me fiercely, her frame thin but her grip surprisingly strong. "I knew you'd find a way," she whispered, "to change things, to make it better." I shook my head, tears threatening. "I just hid. For 8 years I just hid while you survived," she interrupted firmly, "as did I. And now we can do more than survive." My mother joined us, wrapping us both in her arms as if we were children again. Over her shoulder I saw Alexander watching us, something soft in his amber eyes. When our gazes met, he inclined his head slightly, acknowledgement, respect, perhaps something more. In the days that followed, the pack began the difficult work of transformation. The archives were restored to their proper place, though Alexander ordered them open to any who wished to examine them, transparency where once there had been secrecy. A new council was formed, balanced equally between males and females, with my mother among those selected to serve. Sophia grew stronger each day, her quiet courage inspiring others who had suffered in silence to come forward with their stories. The old traditions were examined one by one, some preserved, others modified or discarded according to the will of the pack as a whole, rather than a select few. And I found myself increasingly at Alexander's side, first as a voice for change, then as a trusted advisor, and finally as something neither of us had anticipated when he called me to dance on that fateful night. It happened on the autumn equinox, when the pack gathered once more to celebrate the changing of seasons. The clearing was decorated with golden leaves and late-blooming flowers, lanterns hanging from branches just as they had 3 months earlier. But this time, when the music began, I didn't hide. I stepped forward willingly, dancing with a freedom I had denied myself for 8 years. And when Alexander joined me, his hand finding mine with that same gentle touch I remembered, I didn't pull away. "You never asked," he said as we moved together beneath the harvest moon. "About the records Vincent stole. About my supposedly tainted bloodline." "It doesn't matter," I replied honestly. "Your worth isn't in your bloodline. It's in what you've built, what you continue to build." His smile was warm, reaching his amber eyes. "My thoughts, exactly." His hand tightened slightly around mine. "Eleanor, these past months, working together, I've come to—" "I know," I interrupted softly. "I feel it too." We had circled each other cautiously these months, both of us wounded in different ways by the past, both wary of surrendering control. But as we danced beneath the stars, something shifted between us, a recognition that control and surrender weren't the only options. That partnership, true partnership, was possible. "I won't claim you," he said, his voice low and fervent. "Not now, not ever. Whatever grows between us must be chosen, freely given on both sides." My grandmother's pendant rested against my skin, a familiar weight that now felt like a blessing rather than a burden. "Your strength isn't in your claws or your teeth, Eleanor. It's in here, and here. I choose this," I whispered, meeting his gaze steadily. "I choose you. Not because biology dictates it, not because tradition demands it, but because I want to build something with you. Something neither of us could create alone." His forehead touched mine, a gesture of intimacy more powerful than any claim could have been. Around us, the pack continued their celebration, the music flowing over us like water. But in that moment, there was only this, the choice made freely, the future opening before us full of possibility. No more pretending, no more hiding, just truth and strength, and the courage to step into the light.